They thought it was just another crying baby disturbing a transatlantic flight. But no one on board could have imagined that a poor little girl from Chicago, with nothing but a worn backpack and a heart full of courage, was about to change the destiny of one of the world's most powerful billionaires, and countless lives beyond. If stories of hope, healing, and second chances touch your heart, please subscribe and stay with us until the final chapter. The transatlantic night stretched long and unforgiving, wrapped in the muffled roar of jet engines. From New York's John F. Kennedy Airport to London Heathrow, the cabin lights glowed dimly, passengers settling into their expensive cocoons of comfort. In Seat 2A of first class, however, serenity was shattered. Alexander Reed, billionaire CEO of Aethon Technologies, a titan of artificial intelligence, sat pale and exhausted. His 6-month-old daughter, Lily, writhed in his arms, her tiny fists clenched, her face flushed red as she screamed with a strength that seemed impossible for her size. For 3 relentless hours, the cries echoed through the cabin, reverberating off glassware and polished leather. Flight attendants moved back and forth, offering pacifiers, warm bottles, gentle shushing. Nothing worked. Lily's wails rose above the engines, a raw, unyielding sound that pierced every barrier. Alexander's shirt clung to his back with sweat. His temples throbbed. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, faced down hostile investors, even testified before Congress. But here, in the quiet dark of 30,000 feet, he was utterly powerless. Around him, first-class passengers shifted in irritation. A woman in pearls sighed theatrically, tugging her eye mask lower. A businessman muttered something under his breath, his gaze sharp with judgment. Another pressed the call button, demanding the staff do something. Alexander whispered, his voice breaking, "Please, Lily. Please, sweetheart." He rocked her gently, but the sobs only sharpened. Desperation gnawed at him. He had refused to bring a nanny. He had insisted he could handle this flight on his own. A father's pride, a stubborn will. Now, humiliation burned in his chest. And then, like a shadow stepping out of the background, the figure appeared. From the thin curtain separating first class from economy, a small girl peeked out. She was no more than 8 years old, her brown hair a little tangled, her simple gray dress wrinkled from hours of sitting. In her arms, she clutched a frayed backpack, its seams splitting at the edges. Her eyes, wide and unafraid, searched the aisle until they found Alexander. She hesitated, biting her lip, then shuffled forward. Passengers turned, frowning, wondering what a child from Coach was doing in this rarefied space. She reached Alexander's row and stopped, standing barely level with his armrest. "Sir," she said softly, her voice carrying a calmness that belied her years, "may I try?" Alexander blinked, too weary to respond at first. "Try what?" "Your baby," she said. "I can help." The words hung in the air like something unreal. A ripple of murmurs rose from nearby seats. One man scoffed, "Ridiculous! Send her back!" But the girl didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed on Lily, not the disapproval around her. Alexander looked down at his daughter. Her cries rattled his chest like broken glass. He looked up at the little girl. There was no arrogance in her, no performance, only a quiet certainty. He felt his throat tighten, a strange trust blooming where reason said none should. With trembling hands, he nodded. "Please." The girl stepped closer, holding out her arms. Alexander lowered Lily into them, every nerve screaming with doubt. Yet the moment Lily rested against her small shoulder, something extraordinary happened. The cries faltered, the tiny body softened. Within seconds, the screaming that had plagued the flight for hours melted into soft hiccups, then silence. The cabin froze. The woman in pearls lowered her mask. The businessman stopped mid-grumble. Even the flight attendants exchanged astonished looks. The little girl rocked Lily gently, humming a tune low and sweet. It wasn't a childish lullaby. It carried the depth of something practiced, almost scientific in its rhythm. Her hand rubbed slow circles across the infant's back, her hum dipping in time with Lily's breath. Within a minute, Lily had slipped into calm, her thumb finding her mouth, her eyelids heavy with peace. The cabin exhaled as one. Alexander sat stunned, his arms empty, his heart overwhelmed by the sight. A stranger's child had done what he, with all his resources and power, could not. Who are you?" he whispered. The girl looked up at him with eyes both innocent and ancient. "My name is Clara," she said simply. "Clara Evans. I know how to take care of babies. I used to help with my little brother." Her voice held no boast, only truth. She adjusted Lily carefully, protecting the baby's tiny head with surprising skill. Alexander noticed the roughness of her nails, the faint stains of ink on her fingertips, signs of a life far from the polished world he knew. Passengers returned to their seats, whispering. Some smiled, others shook their heads in disbelief. But Alexander could only stare, feeling something stir deep in his chest, a mixture of gratitude, humility, and a fragile thread of curiosity. For the first time in years, he realized he had been given a gift not bought by wealth or influence, but offered freely by a child with nothing but courage. And though he didn't yet know it, this night would mark the beginning of a journey that would carry them both from the quiet desperation of a crying baby to the halls of Harvard, the wards of Boston hospitals, and the boardrooms of global power. But for now, in the still hum of the aircraft, Alexander leaned back, watching his daughter sleep safe in the arms of a girl who had stepped out of the shadows and into his life. The cabin had settled into a fragile peace. The once restless hum of complaints dissolved into an uneasy but grateful quiet, broken only by the steady drone of engines and the occasional clink of glasses in the galley. Lily slept soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling against Clara's narrow shoulder, as if the storm of her crying had never existed. Alexander Reed sat upright, hands resting helplessly on his knees. He should have felt relief, victory even, that the crisis had passed. Instead, he found himself staring at the girl in front of him, her small frame illuminated by the soft overhead light. Who was she? Clara adjusted in her seat, her feet not quite touching the floor. She had been invited to stay temporarily in first class, and though she looked awkward under the weight of so many curious stares, she did not shrink back. Her expression was calm, her eyes focused only on Lily, as though she understood the responsibility of holding another life in her arms. Alexander leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so as not to disturb the baby. "Clara, is it? How did you know what to do?" She shrugged, her lips pressing into a modest smile. "My brother used to cry like this, all night sometimes. Mom had to work late shifts, so it was me who rocked him to sleep." Her words cut through Alexander more deeply than he expected. He thought of his own sprawling Manhattan apartment, silent except for the echo of his own footsteps, sterile in its perfection. Lily had everything: the latest crib, temperature-controlled formula, medical-grade monitors. Yet when she cried, he was defenseless. And this girl, this child from economy, carried a skill born of necessity, something his billions could not buy. Alexander's gaze drifted to the worn backpack sitting at Clara's feet. It was old, so old the fabric had thinned into threads at the corners, the zipper lined with scratches. The sight stirred something protective in him. He gestured toward it. "What do you carry in there?" Clara's eyes flickered with hesitation. She shifted Lily gently to one arm, then reached down with the other, pulling the bag onto her lap. She unzipped it slowly, revealing not toys or snacks, but a stack of weathered notebooks. Some were spiral-bound with bent covers, others were stitched together with tape. Their pages bulged with scribbled notes. Alongside them lay a small music book, its edges torn, and a thin, dog-eared copy of Introduction to Higher Mathematics. Alexander's breath caught. He picked up one notebook carefully. The handwriting inside, neat, deliberate, was filled with equations he recognized, but at a level far beyond what he imagined for a child her age. Matrix notations, probability models, even fragments of algorithms that reminded him of the early research he himself had studied at MIT. "You wrote these?" he asked, astonished. Clara nodded, her cheeks coloring slightly. "When I can't sleep, I work on problems. Sometimes I hear solutions in my head like music. Mom doesn't really get it, but she says it's good to keep my mind busy." Her casual honesty shook him. Solutions in her head, like music. He turned to the music book, flipping past sketches of treble clefs and tiny notes penciled in margins. There, intertwined with the melody, were annotations, fractions, sequences, ratios. She was translating sound into numbers, bridging two worlds most adults could barely connect. "Where did you learn this?" he pressed. "No one taught me," Clara said softly. "I just see it. At school they let me borrow higher-level textbooks, but I don't always understand the words, so I try to figure it out myself." The confession came without pride, almost apologetic. She closed the notebook quickly, as though ashamed of showing too much. Alexander sat back, his mind racing. In boardrooms and labs, he had heard terms like genius thrown around too easily. But this child was no product of privilege or curated education. This was raw brilliance, unpolished yet undeniable. Clara tucked the notebooks back into her backpack and zipped it shut. She lowered her gaze. "I'm going to Boston," she whispered, as if revealing a fragile secret. "There's a competition at Harvard. They said if I do well, I might get a scholarship to study later. It's my only chance." The words settled between them like a weight. Alexander thought of his own years at MIT, how doors had swung open for him simply because he had the right surname, the right introductions, the right capital. For Clara, each step was a mountain. "And your parents?" he asked gently. "My mom works nights in Chicago. She couldn't afford to come. My brother's too little, so I'm going alone." Clara glanced at Lily, then back at Alexander. "I want to make her proud. I want to give her something back." A lump formed in Alexander's throat. For all his empire of patents and power, when had he last thought of giving back? Not through donations, but through true sacrifice? Around them, the plane droned onward over the Atlantic. The world outside was endless darkness, but inside, Alexander felt a small light had been lit. He studied Clara's profile, the determined set of her jaw, the tired lines under her young eyes, and felt the unsettling sense that fate had seated her on this flight for a reason. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice rough but sincere. "Clara, you may not know it yet, but what you carry in that backpack, it's more valuable than anything most of us in this cabin will ever hold." She blinked at him, startled, then looked down shyly. "It's just paper." "No," Alexander said firmly. "It's possibility." Lily stirred then, letting out a tiny sigh, her hand curling against Clara's collar. The gesture sealed the moment, as though even the infant recognized the bond being formed. For the first time since boarding, Alexander allowed himself to lean back, exhaustion pressing against his bones. But in the quiet of that cabin, his gaze never strayed far from Clara, the girl with the worn backpack, the notebooks of impossible equations, and a courage that had silenced more than just a crying baby. He did not yet know that the hours ahead and the choices they would demand of him would test the very foundations of his empire. But as the Atlantic stretched endlessly beneath them, Alexander Reed had already begun to sense a truth. Sometimes, salvation does not come from the powerful soul, but from the smallest hand reaching out in the dark. The wheels of the Airbus touched down on the runway at Logan International Airport with a heavy shudder. Outside, dawn had barely broken. Boston lay under a veil of pale gray light, the Charles River glinting faintly in the distance. For most passengers, it was a routine arrival, the rush to gather belongings, the impatience of customs lines, the hunger for fresh air after hours sealed inside a metal tube. But for Clara Evans, this was not just another landing. This was the threshold to everything she had pinned her hope on. Alexander Reed stood near the jet bridge, balancing Lily in her carrier as he waited for the crowd to thin. His mind replayed the hours of flight like fragments of a dream, the moment Clara had stepped forward, the silence when Lily had stopped crying, the revelation of the backpack filled with brilliance. He had come to London for a board meeting, a negotiation that would ripple across the global tech industry. Yet now, as he watched the small girl clutch her frayed straps, he felt his priorities shifting in ways he couldn't quite articulate. They moved together through the terminal, Alexander trailing just behind Clara, uneasy at the sight of her small figure navigating a sea of hurried travelers alone. Her steps were steady, but her eyes darted, searching. At the baggage claim, families reunited with shouts and laughter. Chauffeurs lifted signs with polished names. Business people strode with practiced purpose. Clara stood apart, scanning faces, waiting for someone who never came. Minutes stretched, the carousel emptied. She remained, her grip on her backpack tightening. Alexander approached, his voice gentle. "Is someone meeting you here?" Clara hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Mom couldn't afford to come. She's in Chicago. She told me to be brave." The words hit Alexander with the force of a confession. Brave. What a word for a child to wear like armor. He glanced at Lily, who slept peacefully against his chest, then back at Clara, an 8-year-old alone in a foreign city, carrying not just her belongings, but the weight of a dream. "Do you have an address? Someone responsible from the competition to meet you?" he pressed. Clara dug into her backpack, pulling out a folded piece of paper. It was a printed email. The ink faded. National Youth Talent Competition. Preliminary round. Venue: Harvard University, Sanders Theater. Arrival: Saturday, 10 o'clock a.m. Housing: Elliott House Dormitory, supervised by staff. Alexander exhaled slowly. It was legitimate. But still, the idea of sending this fragile, brilliant girl into a crowded subway system alone made his chest tighten. "I'll take you there," he said, his tone firm before she could protest. Clara looked up, startled. "You don't have to. You have your baby, your own plans." He shook his head. "You kept my daughter safe when I couldn't. The least I can do is make sure you arrive where you need to be." Something flickered in Clara's eyes, a mixture of relief and disbelief. She nodded quietly. They stepped into the chilly Boston air together. Alexander signaled for a black town car, ignoring the curious glance of the driver when he saw the billionaire CEO accompanied not by security or executives, but by a little girl in a faded dress. The drive toward Cambridge was quiet at first. The skyline of Boston stretched beyond the windows, a blend of historic brick and gleaming glass towers. Lily dozed, lulled by the movement of the car. Clara pressed her nose to the glass, drinking in the sights with wonder. "Have you ever been here before?" Alexander asked. She shook her head. "I've only seen Boston in pictures. My teacher said it's full of history, revolution, ideas. I want to feel it." Her voice carried a reverence that made Alexander smile faintly. He remembered his own first arrival at MIT decades ago, filled with arrogance rather than awe. Clara's humility struck him with quiet power. The car turned down Massachusetts Avenue, crossing the Charles River, and soon Harvard Yard opened before them. The iron gates, the cobblestone paths, the brick buildings steeped in centuries of thought. It was a place designed to intimidate and inspire in equal measure. As they stepped out, Clara clutched her backpack tighter. She stared at the towering trees and the students hurrying by with books tucked under their arms. For a moment, her small shoulders trembled under the weight of it all. Alexander bent down slightly. "Don't let this place scare you. You belong here as much as anyone." Clara glanced at him, her eyes bright with a defiance that surprised him. "I don't just want to belong here. I want to prove that where you come from doesn't decide how far you go." The words pierced him deeper than he let show. He had built empires, crushed competitors, sat on the highest stages of global conferences. But when was the last time he had thought of proving something not to others, but to himself? Inside Elliott House, a staff member finally appeared, clipboard in hand. "Clara Evans? Yes, we've been expecting you." The woman offered a polite smile, ushering Clara toward a group of children already gathering. Alexander watched as Clara joined them. They were dressed in neat blazers and polished shoes, their suitcases gleaming with brand tags. Clara, with her worn backpack and threadbare sweater, stood out immediately. A few children whispered, covering their smiles with hands. Clara's chin lifted, but her fingers dug into her straps as if holding herself steady. Alexander felt his chest tighten with something fierce. He wanted to intervene, to shield her. But he knew this was her battlefield, one she had been preparing for far longer than he realized. As he turned to leave, Clara called after him. "Mr. Reed." He stopped. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing I can get here." He studied her for a long moment. "Clara, belief is the easy part. What you do next, that's what will change everything." And with that, he carried Lily into the crisp Boston air, unaware that this single act of kindness would entwine his destiny with Clara's far beyond the ivy-covered walls of Harvard. The winter air in Cambridge carried a crisp bite, the kind that made each breath visible as mist. Harvard Yard, with its iron gates and ancient elms, stood majestic, a place heavy with centuries of learning and ambition. Clara Evans, in her plain dress and worn backpack, followed the stream of children toward Sanders Theater, her heart hammering with both dread and resolve. Alexander Reed, holding Lily in her carrier, lingered at the edge of the yard. He had no official reason to be there. His schedule was already fractured by missed calls, urgent messages flashing on his phone from his executive team in New York and London. But something rooted him to the spot. Watching Clara disappear into the crowd of polished, privileged prodigies, he could not bring himself to leave. Inside the theater, light spilled across the polished wood stage where rows of judges sat in dark suits, faces set in practiced neutrality. Hundreds of spectators filled the seats, mostly proud parents whispering in anticipation, clutching expensive cameras. Among them, Clara found no familiar face to wave to, no anchor of comfort. She stood alone, clutching her number card with trembling fingers. The competition began. One by one, children ascended the stage. They solved equations projected onto a massive screen, recited formulas, explained concepts with rehearsed confidence. Applause followed each performance, though sometimes polite rather than genuine. When Clara's number was called, a murmur rippled through the room. She looked so small against the grand stage, her sweater thin, her shoes scuffed. A girl in the front row whispered something, and her mother laughed quietly. Clara's ears burned, but she forced her chin upward. She stepped to the microphone. The problem appeared on the screen, a complex logical sequence, one that required not just memorization, but insight. Clara's eyes scanned it quickly. She didn't write notes. She didn't ask for time. Instead, she spoke calmly, each step of her reasoning clear and deliberate. First, eliminate the redundant variables, she explained, her small voice carrying across the silent hall. Her hand traced invisible patterns in the air, as if drawing lines only she could see. Then reduce the equation to its core relationship. From there, the sequence reveals itself. It is the Fibonacci, layered in reverse. Gasps escaped from several spectators. The judges leaned forward, exchanging glances. On the screen, her solution unfolded in perfect order, each step precise. Alexander, watching from a balcony above, felt something twist inside him. It wasn't just admiration. It was awe. He knew enough to understand the difficulty of the problem. He had seen seasoned graduate students fumble at tasks like this, yet Clara, a girl with nothing but self-taught hunger, had dismantled it in minutes. When she finished, silence hung for a beat too long. Then the applause erupted, not the polite clapping of courtesy, but genuine thunder rolling across the hall. Clara's cheeks flushed pink, her small shoulders rising as though she could finally breathe. But the moment didn't last. A tall boy in an expensive blazer muttered loudly enough for nearby rows to hear, "Anyone can memorize answers. Let's see if she can handle the hard stuff." His father chuckled beside him, shaking his head in dismissal. Clara froze, the sting sharp in her chest. For a fleeting second, the applause blurred into background noise, replaced by the echo of their mockery. She wanted to shrink, to vanish into her backpack. From above, Alexander saw her falter. His jaw clenched, his fingers curling around the railing. He knew that expression too well. The look of a soul told it didn't belong. He had seen it in boardrooms when old guard investors dismissed his vision, in elite circles when his West Coast roots were mocked. But in a child, it was unbearable. Clara steadied herself. She looked at the judges, not the boy, not the smirking parent. "I don't memorize," she said clearly. "I see." The words silenced the whispers. She returned to her seat, her head high though her hands trembled. After several more rounds, the preliminary ended. Judges retreated to deliberate. Children chatted, their parents bustling with excitement. Clara sat alone, her backpack hugged to her chest, watching others with mothers and fathers to lean on. For the first time, her composure cracked. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, quickly brushed away. And then, unexpectedly, she saw him. Alexander Reed, the billionaire she had soothed on the plane, stood at the back of the hall, Lily in his arms. He wasn't clapping or networking with the other wealthy parents. He was simply watching her, his gaze steady, proud in a way she had never felt directed at her. Her throat tightened. For reasons she couldn't explain, his presence stitched her back together. She didn't feel quite so alone anymore. The judges returned. One of them, a silver-haired professor from MIT, took the microphone. "In all my years, I have rarely seen such clarity of thought from someone so young. Today, we have witnessed not just intelligence, but originality." His eyes lingered on Clara as he spoke. Clara's name was announced among the highest scorers, advancing to the next round. Applause filled the hall again, But as she stood to bow slightly, she caught sight of a cluster of parents whispering sharply, their expressions sour. One of them, a mother in a tailored suit, turned her gaze directly on Clara, her lips curling in disdain. The message was clear. You don't belong here no matter what you solve. The victory felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at any touch. Later, as the hall emptied, Clara found herself outside, the cold air biting at her cheeks. She sat on a bench, her backpack at her feet, watching the frost creep across the grass. Alexander approached quietly. Lily slept, bundled in a blanket. He sat beside Clara without speaking at first. The yard around them was hushed, the distant bells of Memorial Church marking the hour. Finally, Alexander spoke. You were extraordinary today. Clara shook her head. They don't want me here. Don't mistake envy for truth, he replied. When people feel threatened, they look for ways to make you small. But Clara, you are not small. She looked at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Then why does it feel like I am? Alexander hesitated, searching for the right words. He thought of the empire he had built, the years of clawing for respect in rooms that wanted him gone. He thought of Lily, whose future would never be touched by such doubt. And he thought of Clara, facing the same fight with nothing but her will. Because greatness always feels too big to carry when you're alone, he said at last. But you don't have to be alone. Clara swallowed hard, her small hands tightening around the straps of her backpack. She nodded slowly, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had someone in her corner. Night fell early over Cambridge, casting long shadows across Harvard Yard. The lamps along the cobblestone paths glowed with a golden hush, and inside Sanders Theater, the day's excitement gave way to the quiet preparations for tomorrow's semi-final round. But beneath the polished veneer of the competition, tension stirred like a hidden current. Clara Evans walked slowly back toward Elliott House with her backpack slung over her shoulders, the victory of the day still fragile in her chest. Her solution had stunned the judges, but the whispers had lingered. Children who once sneered at her now eyed her warily, their parents exchanging knowing glances. She felt it, the invisible wall rising between her and them. She slipped into the dormitory common room, only to find herself the target of hushed voices. A cluster of parents stood near the doorway, their luxury coats draped over chairs, their hands wrapped around steaming paper cups of coffee. She doesn't belong here, one said, her voice sharp. This competition is for prodigies, not charity cases. She probably had help. There's no way a child like that solved those equations alone. Clara froze. They hadn't seen her yet, but every word sank into her like ice, her fists clenched around her backpack straps. And then the tallest of them, a man with silver cufflinks and the air of practiced authority, added, We can't allow this to taint the integrity of the program. If she advances, I'll be speaking with the board. Clara's breath caught. Her chest felt hollow, her victory suddenly meaningless. Tritwe Honkadiachinya. The words escaped her lips almost involuntarily, trembling but fierce. The room went silent. The parents turned, their eyes narrowed, their polished smiles gone. Clara stood small but unyielding, her voice rising though her knees shook. You can take away my clothes, my money, even laugh at my backpack, she said, her voice cracking but steadying with each word. But intelligence, courage, dreams, they don't come from your zip code. They come from here. She pressed a small hand against her chest. And I won't apologize for that. The silence was suffocating. For a moment, she feared they would laugh. But no sound came, only the cold weight of disapproval in their stares. She turned quickly, retreating to the stairwell. Her legs carried her upward blindly, until she collapsed on the landing, burying her face in her backpack. Hot tears welled, her shoulders shaking. Unbeknownst to her, Alexander Reed had witnessed everything. He had come to Elliott House after finishing a call with his London partners, drawn back by an unease he couldn't name. When he saw Clara stand against that wall of privilege, heard her trembling declaration, something inside him cracked open. The boardroom politics he had faced seemed tame compared to the courage she had just shown. He remembered his own youth, walking into MIT lectures where others dismissed him as a West Coast nobody, where his ideas were brushed aside until he forced them into recognition. But he had never been 8 years old, alone, armed with nothing but a backpack and defiance. He climbed the stairs quietly and found her curled on the landing. Lily stirred softly in her carrier, as if sensing the heaviness in the air. "Clara," Alexander said gently. She wiped her eyes quickly, forcing herself upright. I didn't mean to cause trouble." He shook his head. "You didn't cause trouble. You spoke truth. And sometimes truth makes people uncomfortable." Her lips trembled. "They'll never let me win, no matter how hard I try." Alexander crouched down, meeting her eye level. His voice was firm, low, the way he spoke in boardrooms when he needed everyone to listen. "Listen to me. I've built companies worth billions. I've sat across from world leaders. But I have never seen bravery like what you showed tonight. You don't need their permission to be extraordinary. You already are." Clara sniffled, hugging her backpack tighter. "But what if they push me out?" "Then you push harder," Alexander replied. "And if you fall, I'll be there to make sure you stand again." Something shifted in her then. Not relief, not complete belief, but the smallest spark of trust. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. At that moment, a text buzzed on Alexander's phone. His assistant's words flashed across the screen. "Urgent. Investors threatening withdrawal if you delay tomorrow's London session." The weight of two worlds pressed on him, his empire on one side, this small girl's fragile dream on the other. He felt the familiar pull of duty, but for the first time, he questioned which duty truly mattered. He silenced the phone. "Come," he said softly, extending his hand. Clara hesitated, then placed her tiny palm into his. Together they descended the stairs, Lily nestled between them. In the common room, the parents looked up as Alexander strode past. Their whispers shifted, uneasy now. They recognized him. Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO whose name carried weight in every financial district. His presence beside Clara was no accident. It was a shield. He didn't speak to them. He didn't need to. The message was clear. This girl was not alone. Later that night, in her dormitory bed, Clara opened her journal. By the glow of a small lamp, she scribbled furiously, as if her heart demanded to be heard. Equations, music notes, and in the margins, a sentence written in shaky handwriting, "Dreams have no address." Outside, Harvard Yard slept under the hush of winter. But within the shadows of its oldest halls, a spark had been lit, one that no amount of privilege or disdain could extinguish. The morning sun had barely risen over Cambridge when Clara Evans stepped onto the stage for her semi-final round. Her hands trembled, though she pressed them firmly to her sides, steadying herself. The problem she faced was monstrous, an open-ended scenario combining mathematics, logic, and probability. For the privileged children around her, it was one more challenge in a life of tutors and endless resources. For Clara, it was everything. She tried to focus, but her body betrayed her. A wave of dizziness swept over her. Her vision blurred, the symbols on the board swimming together. She swallowed hard, gripping the podium. She hadn't eaten since a half sandwich the day before. Food money was scarce, and she had been rationing what little she brought from Chicago. She forced her voice steady, answering step by step. But halfway through, her knees buckled. Gasps filled the hall as she collapsed to the floor. From the back of the theater, Alexander Reed surged forward, Lily strapped to his chest. The crowd parted at the sight of him, whispers rippling. Is that Alexander Reed? The billionaire? But he didn't care. He knelt beside Clara, his voice sharp with fear. Clara, stay with me. Her eyelids fluttered. She whispered, barely audible. I'm fine. I just need a minute. Then she slipped into unconsciousness. Chaos erupted. Judges scrambled. Staff rushed to call emergency services. Within minutes, paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, and Clara was carried swiftly out of Sanders Theater. Alexander followed, ignoring the stares, his heart pounding. He had faced hostile takeovers, billion-dollar lawsuits, moments where entire companies teetered on collapse, but none of it had prepared him for the terror of seeing that little girl, brilliant and fragile, fade before his eyes. Boston Children's Hospital stood tall and gleaming, a beacon of hope for families across the nation. Its hallways smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, a mix of fear and resilience clinging to the air. Clara lay in a small room, pale against the sheets, her backpack placed carefully on a chair beside her. Electrodes tracked her heartbeat. A doctor in a white coat entered, glancing at Alexander before speaking. Are you family? Alexander hesitated. I'm a guardian for the moment. The doctor nodded, professional but not unkind. The girl collapsed due to severe fatigue and malnutrition. She's dangerously underweight for her age. It's remarkable she's functioning at all. Has she been eating regularly? Alexander's jaw clenched. He thought of the empty look in Clara's lunch bag on the plane. No, he said hoarsely. Not enough. The doctor sighed. Her body is strong, but it's been pushed beyond safe limits. Without proper nutrition and rest, she risks long-term complications. She needs stability, care, and above all, food. When the doctor left, silence filled the room. Clara stirred, her eyes blinking open. She saw the wires, the machines, then Alexander, his face taut with concern. I'm sorry, she whispered, shame in her tone. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Alexander leaned forward, his voice breaking. Clara, listen to me. You never apologize for needing help. Do you understand? You've carried too much on your own. Tears welled in her eyes. I couldn't tell anyone. Mom doesn't have enough money. I didn't want her to worry, so I pretended I wasn't hungry, pretended it didn't matter. The words pierced him. Alexander thought of his own pantry at home, stocked with imported foods he rarely touched. He thought of Lily, who had never known a day without formula, diapers, or warmth. And now, beside him, lay a child who had carried hunger like a hidden wound, all while solving equations beyond imagination. He reached for her hand, small and trembling. Clara, you don't have to pretend anymore. Not with me. For the first time, she let the tears fall freely. While Clara slept again, Alexander stepped into the hallway. His phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from his CFO, warnings about the London negotiations. Your presence is non-negotiable. Investors are restless. Billions at stake. He leaned against the wall, torn. The world expected him in boardrooms, not hospitals. His empire teetered on delicate balances, every decision scrutinized. Yet here, in a hospital bed, lay a child who had shown him a truth no investor could measure. That brilliance and hunger should never coexist. A nurse walked past, smiling faintly at Lily cooing in her carrier. Alexander looked down at his daughter's small face, then back at Clara's closed door. In that moment, the scales shifted. He sent a single text to his assistant. Cancel London. Tell the board they'll have to wait. Later that evening, Clara woke again. A tray of food sat beside her. Warm broth, bread, fruit. She eyed it nervously, then looked to Alexander. Eat, he said gently. She hesitated, then picked up the spoon. Each bite seemed to restore her color, her spirit. When she finished, she leaned back, her eyes heavy but her voice soft. I thought if I worked hard enough, I could outrun being poor. But hunger caught me anyway. Alexander's chest tightened. Clara, you've already outrun it. You've proven more courage than most adults I know. But running alone will only break you. Let me help you carry it. Her lips curved in the smallest of smiles. You really think I can still win? He brushed a stray hair from her forehead, fatherly without realizing it. Clara, you've already won. The rest is just proving it to them. For the first time since he had boarded that flight at JFK, Alexander felt clarity. His world of numbers, mergers, and algorithms had shrunk in significance. What mattered now was ensuring this girl's light never dimmed again. Outside, the Boston skyline glittered, the Charles River catching the reflection of city lights. Inside, in a quiet hospital room, a billionaire and a poor girl forged a bond not of convenience, but of survival and of promise. The following morning, Boston's financial district stirred awake with its usual rhythm. Suits hurrying down narrow sidewalks, the clang of trolley bells, the steady hum of ambition rising with the dawn. Glass towers reflected the pale winter sun, monuments of commerce that seemed untouchable. Inside one of those towers, a sleek boardroom awaited Alexander Reed. His company, Aethon Technologies, was on the brink of securing a multi-billion-dollar partnership with European investors. The deal promised to expand their AI platforms across continents, cementing Aethon as an empire that would outlast generations. But Alexander's mind was elsewhere. He had spent the night in a chair beside Clara's hospital bed, watching the frail rhythm of her breathing, the rise and fall of her chest as machines beeped softly around her. Her notebook sat stacked neatly on the side table, symbols of brilliance nearly lost to hunger. When dawn came, he forced himself to leave, Lily in tow, with a promise to return. Now, as he entered the glass-walled boardroom, the air was already thick with tension. Men and women in tailored suits tapped their pens, checked their watches. On the wall screen, the London team waited on video feed, their faces tight with impatience. Mr. Reed, began Patricia Lang, the CFO, her voice cool as steel. We've delayed this session already. Our partners in Zurich are restless. We cannot afford further distractions. Alexander took his seat at the head of the table. He felt the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on him. His assistant discreetly placed a folder in front of him. The terms of the deal. Numbers, projections, billions in valuation. Everything he had worked for compressed into neat, glossy pages. Patricia continued, The investors want reassurance that your attention remains on Aethon. Rumors are circulating about you abandoning London, about personal entanglements. We need clarity. Alexander's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what she meant. The press had caught wind of him rushing from Harvard to a hospital, the image of a billionaire carrying a small child, Clara, circulating like wildfire. Social media was ablaze with speculation. Has the great Alexander Reed lost his focus? One of the Zurich investors spoke through the screen. His accent clipped. Mr. Reed, your innovations are valuable, but business is unforgiving. If you cannot commit fully, we must reconsider our partnership. The silence was suffocating. Alexander glanced at the folder, then at the city skyline beyond the glass. He thought of Lily, her soft breath against his neck. He thought of Clara, whispering through tears that she pretended not to be hungry so her mother wouldn't worry. He thought of the parents in the common room, dismissing her brilliance because she was poor. His conscience roared louder than any investor. He stood slowly, closing the folder without opening it. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice steady. "Athon has thrived because we pursue truth, not shortcuts. But if truth is not enough for this partnership, then perhaps it is not the right one." Gasps broke around the room. Patricia's eyes widened. "Alexander, think carefully." "I have," he interrupted, his tone firm. "I will not sacrifice the integrity of what we build for the sake of appeasing impatience. And I will not measure success by how many zeros follow a number, but by what those numbers allow us to create for the world." The Zurich investor frowned. "Are you rejecting the deal?" "I am postponing it," Alexander said, "until I can stand here knowing it won't cost me the very values that made this company worth building." Whispers erupted. Board members shifted in agitation, some furious, others stunned. Patricia leaned forward, her voice a dagger cloaked in civility. "You're risking everything. Shareholder confidence, market stability, years of planning." Alexander met her eyes. "If everything can be risked by choosing principle over greed, then maybe it wasn't worth as much as we thought." The room froze. For a long moment, no one spoke. The call ended abruptly, the Zurich team cutting the feed. Patricia slammed her pen shut, her lips thin with fury. But Alexander felt something he hadn't in years: clarity. He turned, leaving the boardroom behind. Back at Boston Children's Hospital, Clara was awake, propped up by pillows, her notebook already open across her lap. Equations spilled across the page, though her hand moved slower than usual. She looked up as Alexander entered, Lily gurgling happily in his arms. "You came back," Clara said softly. "Of course," Alexander replied. He pulled a chair beside her bed. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Her eyes flickered, betraying the truth. Yes, she had thought that. People left. That was the rule of her world. Alexander set Lily gently on the bed beside Clara, who reached out instinctively, letting the baby grasp her finger. "How was your important thing?" she asked carefully, as if afraid to intrude. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke with quiet conviction. "The most important thing I did today was come back here." Clara blinked, startled. "But wasn't it about your company? Billions of dollars?" He smiled faintly. "Some things are worth more than billions." Her brow furrowed. "Like what?" "Like making sure a little girl who should never have been hungry knows she's not alone anymore." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushing. For Alexander, the decision felt terrifying and liberating all at once. He had defied the expectations of investors, risked the wrath of his own board. But for the first time, he felt he had chosen rightly. He had chosen conscience over conquest. And as he watched Clara trace patterns in her notebook, her eyes regaining their light, he knew he would do it again. The snow outside had thickened overnight, dusting Harvard Yard with a quiet whiteness. Inside Sanders Theater, tensions swirled like a storm barely contained. The final round of the National Youth Talent Competition was about to begin. For Clara Evans, it was the culmination of every sleepless night with a notebook, every whispered equation in the dark, every hunger pang endured without complaint. She stood backstage, her backpack clutched tightly. The other finalists gathered nearby, immaculate in pressed uniforms, their parents giving last-minute advice with polished confidence. Clara had no one but her own courage, and somewhere in the crowd, Alexander Reed, holding Lily close, his gaze fixed on her. The head judge stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, today's final challenge is not only about solving a problem, but about creativity. We wish to see not just knowledge, but how you bring knowledge to life. Assistants placed objects on the stage, a single candle, a piano, and a chalkboard. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Clara's number was called second. Her heart pounded as she walked into the spotlight. The candle flickered on the table, its flame fragile against the cavernous hall. "Your task," the judge announced, "is to present a mathematical truth in a way that teaches not only the mind, but the imagination." Clara froze for a moment. All eyes were on her. She could hear the whisper of her critics already. What could a poor child possibly show us? She drew in a breath. Then, with steady steps, she walked to the piano. Her small hands hovered above the keys. She pressed a note, then another. The sound rang clear, the hall leaning into silence. She began to play a simple sequence, weaving it into the Fibonacci pattern, each note rising and falling with mathematical precision. Then she spoke, her voice soft but carrying. "Mathematics is not only numbers, it is rhythm, it is balance, just like this flame." She gestured to the candle, its light trembling. "Fragile, but governed by laws. The same sequence that describes the growth of a sunflower describes the intervals in music. What we feel as harmony is mathematics singing." Her fingers moved across the keys, building the melody. On the chalkboard, she drew spirals and ratios in chalk, aligning them with the notes she played. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Even the skeptical parents sat frozen. "And this," she finished, her voice breaking just slightly, "is proof that knowledge belongs to everyone. Because the same truth lives in a song, in a flower, in the smallest child with a notebook." When the final chord lingered, the hall was silent, utterly silent. The candle flame wavered, catching the breath of the moment. Then the applause began. First a ripple, then a thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. Clara stepped back, her face flushed, eyes wide with disbelief. From the balcony, Alexander felt his throat tighten. Lily clapped her small hands, giggling as if she too understood. For Alexander, it wasn't just pride, it was revelation. He had watched countless presentations from world-class scientists, yet none had touched the human spirit like the performance of this 8-year-old girl. After the round, Clara sat backstage, trembling with both relief and fear. What if it wasn't enough? What if brilliance could still be denied by prejudice? Then she heard footsteps. Alexander appeared, tall and calm, Lily cradled in his arms. He crouched beside Clara, his voice low. "You lit a fire in there," he said. Clara shook her head. "It'll go out. People like me, we never get chosen." Alexander's gaze hardened. "Clara, listen to me. The flame you lit cannot be put out by those who fear it. And even if they try, I'll protect it, always." Her lips parted, her small hands clutching her backpack tighter. For the first time, she let herself believe him. Hours later, the judges returned. The theater brimmed with anticipation. Parents leaned forward, cameras ready. Children held their breath. "The winner of this year's National Youth Talent Competition," the head judge announced, "is Clara Evans." For a second, Clara couldn't move. The words didn't register. Then the audience erupted, applause roaring like a wave. She stumbled forward, her legs weak. The judge placed the medal around her neck, then handed her the certificate of a full scholarship. Tears blurred her vision. She turned her head, instinctively searching the crowd. There. Alexander, standing tall, Lily in his arms. He didn't clap politely like the others. He simply placed his hand over his heart, his eyes steady on her, as if to say, "You did it, and I will never let them take this from you." For Clara, it was more than victory. It was vindication. That evening, back in her dormitory, Clara placed the medal inside her notebook. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers tracing the cool metal. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Mom, we did it." In the quiet, she felt something stir, not just pride, but the dawning of a new truth, that her life was no longer a solitary fight. She had allies now, and perhaps a family she had never expected. Outside, snowflakes drifted down, blanketing Harvard Yard in white. Inside, a small flame burned bright in the heart of a girl who had proven that genius is not bound by wealth, but by courage and imagination. Harvard Hall glowed with chandeliers that evening, its historic walls echoing with applause and laughter. The closing ceremony of the National Youth Talent Competition was more than an award ceremony. It was a celebration of privilege, tradition, and the coronation of the next generation of intellectual elites. Rows of tables gleamed with crystal glasses and polished silver. Parents in evening gowns and tuxedos mingled, congratulating each other as though the victories of their children were reflections of their own prestige. At the center of it all, Clara Evans sat small and quiet, the gold medal heavy around her neck. Her dress was the same plain one she had worn all week, patched at the hem. Her backpack lay at her feet, frayed and out of place among the designer handbags and tailored suits. She twisted the strap nervously, her eyes lowered. From the balcony above, Alexander Reed watched. Lily rested on his shoulder, drifting in and out of sleep. His phone buzzed with urgent calls from New York, his board demanding explanations, investors threatening revolt. But tonight, he ignored it all. His gaze never left Clara. The head judge stepped onto the podium, his voice booming. "This year, we have witnessed extraordinary talent, but one performance has reminded us why this competition exists, not to reward privilege, but to honor true genius." He gestured toward Clara. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our champion, Clara Evans." A hush swept the hall. Clara rose slowly, her knees trembling, and walked to the stage. The chandeliers glittered above her, their light almost blinding. She gripped the podium with both hands, her small voice barely reaching the first row. "Thank you," she began, faltering. Whispers rippled among the crowd, murmurs of disapproval, of disbelief. She could hear them. "She doesn't belong here. It's a mistake." Her chest tightened. The medal felt heavy, like a burden she wasn't allowed to carry. She thought of her mother working late nights in Chicago, of the countless times she'd pretended she wasn't hungry. She thought of the parents in the common room whispering that she was unworthy. Her throat closed. Words stuck. And then Alexander stood. He descended the balcony stairs slowly, each step deliberate. The room stirred with recognition, gasps and whispers spreading like fire. "Is that Alexander Reed, the billionaire?" He carried Lily in one arm, but his presence was larger than any title or fortune. He reached the stage and placed a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. His voice, low but resonant, filled the hall. "I owe this girl my deepest gratitude. On a flight not long ago, my daughter was inconsolable. No one could help, except her. Clara Evans. She soothed my child not with money or privilege, but with courage and love." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some frowned, others leaned forward. Alexander continued, his gaze sweeping across the hall. "I have built companies worth billions. I have stood in boardrooms where numbers define worth. But tonight I stand here to tell you, this child's value is not in numbers. It is in the brilliance she carries, the resilience she embodies, and the light she shares freely, even when the world tells her she does not belong. He paused, his voice tightening with conviction. I will personally sponsor her education, not as charity, but as recognition of what she deserves. And beyond that, I will establish a foundation so that no child like Clara will ever be told their dreams are too expensive. Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed. The hall buzzed with disbelief and awe. Clara looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. One of the parents who had mocked her earlier rose reluctantly. His son tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "She solved what I couldn't." The man's shoulders sagged. He bowed his head slightly toward Clara. Others followed, their disdain giving way to quiet acknowledgement. The applause began, not the thunderous applause of spectacle, but the slow, steady rhythm of respect. It grew, filling Harvard Hall until the chandeliers seemed to tremble. Clara's chest swelled. She stepped forward to the microphone, her voice steadier now. Thank you for listening. I don't have fancy words. I just want to say, dreams don't come from where you live or how much money you have. They come from here. She pressed a hand to her chest. And every child deserves the chance to follow them. The room rose to its feet. Alexander bent down, whispering so only she could hear. You didn't just win tonight, Clara. You changed the rules. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded, clutching her medal, her backpack, and the certainty that for the first time, the world could no longer deny her. Above them, Harvard Hall glowed brighter than ever, as if the very walls had absorbed the truth. Genius wears many faces, and sometimes the smallest voice carries the most enduring power. The Amtrak train rumbled steadily across the Midwest, slicing through miles of snow-dusted fields. Clara Evans pressed her forehead against the cool window, her gold medal tucked safely inside her notebook. Her backpack, frayed, patched, faithful, rested on her lap. For the first time, it felt less like a burden and more like a treasure chest. Beside her sat Alexander Reed, his tailored coat folded neatly, Lily cradled against his chest. The billionaire CEO looked oddly at home on a modest train bench, his eyes not on spreadsheets or screens, but on the wintry landscape rolling past. Chicago appeared on the horizon by late afternoon, its skyline jagged against the pale winter sky. Clara's chest tightened. For days, she had lived in a world of chandeliers and applause, but now reality loomed. The narrow apartment, her mother's tired eyes, the bills stacked on the counter. Would this new beginning survive the weight of her old world? At Union Station, the crowd spilled onto the platform. Alexander carried Lily with one arm, Clara following close behind. The air was sharp with the smell of diesel and winter wind. On the edge of the platform, a woman stood anxiously. Her uniform from the diner was still on, apron tied at the waist, hair pulled back hastily. Her hands were red from dishwater, her eyes lined with exhaustion. But when she saw Clara, everything else fell away. "Mom!" Clara cried, running into her arms. Her mother clutched her fiercely, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Clara, my baby! I was so worried. I prayed every night you'd be safe." "I'm safe, Mom," Clara whispered. She pulled back, her voice trembling. "And I did it. I won. Full scholarship." Her mother gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh, Clara!" Alexander stepped forward then, Lily nestled quietly against him. "Mrs. Evans," he said gently, "your daughter is extraordinary, and she's not alone anymore." Clara's mother blinked, overwhelmed. You're Alexander Reed." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "Yes, but today I'm just a grateful father." Clara saved my daughter on a flight, and in doing so, she saved more than she knows. I'd like to help, if you'll allow me." Her mother's voice shook. "We don't need charity." Alexander shook his head. "This isn't charity. This is investment. In Clara, and in children like her who deserve the future too often denied them." He handed her a folder. Inside were documents, tuition guarantees, housing assistance, and the charter for something new, the Lighthouse Foundation. Clara's mother opened it slowly. "What is this?" "A foundation based here in Chicago," Alexander explained. "We'll provide scholarships, mentoring, and STEM programs for underprivileged children. Clara will be its first ambassador. Her light will guide others." Tears spilled freely down her mother's cheeks. She pulled Clara closer, whispering, "Do you see, baby? You're not just changing your own life. You're opening doors for others." Clara's heart swelled. She looked at Alexander, at Lily giggling in his arms, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt present, possible, alive. Weeks later, in a modest community center on Chicago's South Side, a crowd gathered. The newly painted sign read, "Lighthouse Foundation, Opening Day." Children filed in, some with worn shoes and threadbare jackets, eyes wide with cautious hope. At the front of the hall stood a piano, polished but second-hand. Clara sat on the bench, her medal tucked beneath her sweater, her fingers poised above the keys. Alexander stood nearby with Lily, and her mother beamed from the front row, apron gone, her hair brushed neatly for the occasion. Clara took a deep breath. "This song," she said softly into the microphone, "is for every child who ever thought they didn't belong." Her fingers danced across the piano, weaving numbers into music once more. The melody rose, filling the room with warmth. Children clapped along, their laughter mingling with the sound. For a moment, it felt as if the whole city had leaned in to listen. Alexander lifted Lily higher, her small hands clapping in delight. His chest swelled with something he hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not profit, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from giving, from belonging, from family. As the final chord lingered, Clara looked out at the sea of faces, children like herself, hungry for hope. She smiled, her eyes shining. "Dreams," she said softly, "don't have an address, but they do have a home. And tonight, we are building it together." The applause thundered. Alexander felt tears sting his eyes. He looked at Clara, then at her mother, then at Lily. This unlikely constellation of souls, billionaire, waitress, genius child, infant, had become something more than chance. They had become a family, bound not by blood but by love and purpose. And as the snow fell gently outside, coating Chicago in white, the Lighthouse Foundation's first light burned bright, proof that even the smallest act of courage can ignite a future no shadow could extinguish. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Clara and Alexander's journey. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more tales of hope, healing, and second chances. Together, let's keep the light of compassion burning.